We're looking at the 6th chapter of the Picture of Dorian Gray. Up until this point, we've come to the conclusion that Dorian is now obsessed with Sybil Vane. Okay? And the reason why he's obsessed with her is really because of Lord Henry's influence and this new hedonism which he says Dorian should follow, in which society should follow. You know, seeking pleasure and trying to chase new sensations and new experiences. It's the only way to cure the soul and all that. So Dorian, that's the whole reason why he goes out into the sordid area of London and finds this theatre and watches Sybil. It's for a new experience. And of course, falling in love is also a new experience. And because Sybil is very beautiful, and Dorian has now been told that he's very good looking and his looks are very important, mainly through Lord Henry, but also through Basil's adoration. He's drawn to Sybil because here is somebody who is also very attractive. And we know she's attractive and beautiful because Dorian tells us. Okay? And he tells Lord Henry and Basil. Remember, we spoke about what her eyes were like and her lips and all that. And so Dorian kind of declares his absolute love for her, love in inverted commas, due to her overly romantic and, well, incredibly tragic depictions of love on stage. So it's all about Dorian being drawn to the characterization and depictions of love as it is on stage, not the reality of it. So he's drawn to art, and he's not drawn to Sybil as a character or even drawn to true love. He's drawn to what love looks like when it's portrayed on stage. Page 85, when Basil and Lord Henry are at the Bristol and Lord Henry tells Basil about Dorian getting engaged, Basil says, "I can't believe it. Dorian is far too sensible." Now, earlier on in the novel, Basil referred to Dorian as having a simple and beautiful nature, untouched by corruption. But unfortunately, that Dorian no longer exists because the new Dorian has been corrupted by Lord Henry. Mostly. Page 86, Basil says, "I hope the girl is good, Harry. I don't want to see Dorian tied to some vile creature." And unfortunately, it's ironic because Dorian is currently tied to some vile creature, and that being Lord Henry. Lord Henry says, "Oh, Sybil is better than good. She is beautiful." You look at that, you see, there it is. There's the understanding that beauty overrules any good morals, any good values, that looks are all important, that aestheticism. Page 87, Lord Henry says, "I hope that Dorian Gray will make this girl his wife, passionately adore her for 6 months, and then suddenly become fascinated," he likes that word, "by someone else. He would be a wonderful study." That is incredibly selfish and cruel. How can you wish that upon somebody that you supposedly, or at least act as though, is your friend or someone that you care about? That would be incredibly tragic. But to Lord Henry, how fascinating it would be to watch somebody's life unravel like that. And as we mentioned earlier in a previous video, it didn't matter how it all ended. Lord Henry doesn't care what actually happens to Dorian Gray. Then, of course, Dorian arrives and Basil says, "I hope you will always be very happy, Dorian, but I don't quite forgive you for not having let me know of your engagement. You let Harry know." That emphasizes the gap that has occurred and is extending in the relationship between Dorian and Basil. That they went from seeing each other every day. The start of the novel, Basil says to Lord Henry, I'd be lost if I didn't see him every day. And now it's going weeks and you don't see Dorian, right? So the connection between Dorian and Basil, and therefore good advice, which we mentioned in the previous chapter, I think he doesn't like, it annoys him, is growing greater. And so the chances are of redemption for Dorian, of being pulled back from the corruptive capture of Lord Henry, is getting weaker and weaker. Page 89, Dorian says, "Of course our engagement is a dead secret. She has not even told her own mother." And then again, that's going to link with what happens later. Page 89 as well, Dorian says, I left her in the forest of Arden, I shall find her in an orchard in Verona. And that's just a reference to places in theatre, in fiction, in stories, which tells me that Dorian is living in a fantasy world, that his whole relationship with this girl is fantasy. It's not even real. Basil says, Dorian is not like other men. He would never bring misery upon anyone. That's what he says. After Lord Henry starts talking about, you shouldn't get married, marriage is not a good idea and all that. And Basil says he would never bring misery upon anyone, which we all know,
right? Wrong.
Is not what happens. Dorian definitely brings misery upon many people, as we will see. Page 90, Dorian says, when you see Sybil Vane, you will feel that the man who could wrong her would be a beast without a heart. Well, later on, in the next chapter, Dorian does treat Sybil Vane very badly, and so therefore he himself is a beast. But I've put in pink there, a beast without a heart, because Dorian sort of becomes a beast without a heart, not a physical heart, but a soul, because the soul is now represented by the painting. So theoretically, Dorian could be a beast walking around without a heart/soul. And that is why he gets away with it, because the painting absorbs his conscience. He later goes on to say, I want to place her on a pedestal of gold and to see the world worship the woman who is mine. She's not an object, you shouldn't be doing that. That's also very childlike thinking. That's not true love. That's not how you view somebody that you love. Later on the page he says, when I am with her, I regret all that you have taught me, Lord Henry. I become different from what you have known me to be. I am changed. Yes, Dorian, you are changed, but not how you think you are changed. And the mere touch of Sybil's hand, very poetic, but quite ridiculous, makes me forget you and all your wrong, fascinating, poisonous, delightful theories. And you look at those words and you think there's sort of like oxymorons, going on there, because those words are sort of contradicting each other a little bit. You've got wrong, which is very negative, and then you've got fascinating, which means, but I enjoy them. Poisonous, which means, disagreeable, deplorable, appalling, but delightful has a positive connotation. So that tells me that Dorian, although he doesn't always agree with what Lord Henry says, follows it anyway, and is completely engrossed by what Lord Henry has to say. And Lord Henry says, and what are those theories? What are the theories? And we spoke in a previous video about how Lord Henry, I think it was at the luncheon, doesn't even know what he says half the time. Because remember, he said, was all I said bad? And Mr. Erskine said, yes, it was very bad, and I consider you very dangerous and all that. Okay. Dorian says, your theories about life, about love, and about pleasure. And let's be honest, Lord Henry has a lot of theories about that. All your theories, in fact, Harry. Okay, so Dorian is aware of it. Page 90, Lord Henry says, pleasure is the only thing worth having a theory about. That is pure hedonism right there. All right? That you must only enjoy yourself and experience pleasure, and nothing else matters. And that is one of the principles, that is one of the aphorisms, in a sense, although it's incorrect, that is driving Dorian's way in life. When we are happy, says Lord Henry, we are always good, but when we are good, we are not always happy. That's an epigram, trying to create some form of antithesis to create humor and sound witty. And I mean, it's sort of true, like, when we are good, we're not always happy. Yes, sometimes doing the right thing isn't pleasant, but when we are happy, we are always good. That is definitely not good advice at all. That's awful advice, because that's not true. You could be doing terrible things and having a fun time, which doesn't mean it's right. Page 91, Lord Henry says, one's own life, that is the important thing. And we've spoken about this before, but the individualism, the selfishness of Victorian society, the people, the upper class, the aristocracy, the aristocrats, believed in pleasing themselves and, stuff everybody else. Basil says, but surely if one lives merely for oneself, Harry, one pays a terrible price for doing so. And we say, yes, that's true, But first of all, Lord Henry says, oh, what do you mean, like money? And Basil's like, no, I don't mean money. One has to pay in other ways, in remorse, in suffering, in consciousness of degradation, which is true, right? You do wrong things, you have a conscience, you feel guilty, you feel remorse, you suffer because of it. And then in pink they are put in the consciousness, so you have a conscience and you're aware of the degradation, the degrading, the downfall of your soul, the ruining of your soul, that's the best way of putting it, the destruction of your soul. Okay, but now Dorian sort of has a solution for that, in that he's got a painting that is his soul that nobody knows about, and so he doesn't have to suffer because the painting is going to do that for him, whereas other people would suffer with their soul. Page 91, Lord Henry says, medieval emotions, and I know we don't spell medieval like that anymore, but that's how they used to spell it then, are out of date. No civilized man ever regrets a pleasure. So medieval, relating to the Middle Ages, associated with being cruel and uncivilized and primitive. And Lord Henry is saying that, being kind and respectful, etc., are not right. And that if you are civilized, you'll never regret a pleasure. What? If you are civilized, you'll never regret a pleasure? No, that's deplorable, disagreeable, very bad advice. Okay? If you are civilized, then certain what may be a pleasure should not be done. You don't go and sleep with 5 different women when you're married because it brings you pleasure and that makes you civilized. No, it does not. Page 92, Dorian says, Harry, you are dreadful. I don't know why I like you so much. That sums up really how Dorian feels about Lord Henry. He doesn't agree with everything, but he just can't help it, can't help himself. He just follows the advice all the time. And Lord Henry, as we've mentioned many times, well aware of the influence that he has over Dorian, says, but you will always like me. And he goes on to say, yes, Dorian, you will always be fond of me. I represent to you all the sins you have never had the courage to commit. And that is very true. What Lord Henry says there, he's spot on. Page 93, Basil felt that Dorian Gray, because Dorian and Lord Henry leave and they go in a 2-man carriage, and Lord Henry says, sorry Basil, but you'll have to catch your own carriage. And at that moment, the end of the chapter, Basil feels that Dorian Gray would never again be to him all that he had been in the past. Life had come between them, and it's not so much life that's come between them, but Lord Henry that's come between them. And now Sybil Vane as well. Sybil Vane has also sort of come between them too. But Basil is very right that Dorian Gray will never be the same Dorian Gray that was in the studio when Basil painted him.